This is Johnny Vedmore on today's News Talk TNT.
Welcome back to the Johnny Vedmore Show. I'm here with Mike Netter, and we're going to get maybe a little bit uncomfortable here and there, and that's a good thing. It's important to get uncomfortable. What is this about? What are these protests about then, Mike? Because as you were saying, you're saying it's not about Israel, Gaza, but a lot of people on the left, I mean, they're only able to be co-opted by the Soros lot because they've got a cause which they rightly feel passionate about, and on the other side the same. So what is this about? Give us your take on it.
Okay, let's start with the fact that people have relatively short memories. And when you're younger, like many of these students, you have no memory at all because it wasn't in your purview when it happened. A great example is, and I forget his name, but the head of Saudi Arabia, what was it, 2 weeks ago?
Mohammed bin Salman.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad you remember. We use his initials here, okay? But he got a fist bump from Joe Biden after basically the West said, hey, you murdered a journalist. And nobody really seems to remember that. So what I'm leading up to, it's not necessarily Israel versus Gaza. I'm pro-Israel. I'm against terrorism. Period. End of sentence. I'm for the defense of women and children. And I think most people would agree on that. So let's take a step back. Many of these groups that I've seen being quoted, oddly enough, in what we call the mainstream press aren't the students. They're the Palestinians for Liberation. They're these groups that have various Liberate Palestine, Free whatever name. And when you look up the names of these groups, which anybody can do, by the way, you find that the leaders of these groups didn't start in Gaza. They started in places like Syria, and they started in places like Qatar, and they started a few years ago. And they originally started, some of them, as yes, against the Syrian government. Then, oddly enough, sided with the Syrian government about the time Syria, is what I was leading up to, gassed 2,000 of their own people. And we can debate whether or not that really happened, but it did take place, and we got shielded from why it happened. So these groups have direct funding lines. Not we paint it as Soros, we paint it as individuals because it's good for us. But the reality is, a lot of these groups and initial funding comes from something we really can't stare into, right? And we have students, instead of questioning, what am I really protesting about? I'm against Israel. I'm against this. I'm against that. Questioning with who is talking to them and who is influencing them, because unfortunately, we have short memories when it comes to terrorism, oppression of women, destruction of children on both sides of the aisle. And we shouldn't be arguing about, look, I'm pro-Israel. They shouldn't be going after children. Hamas shouldn't have come after Israel. Let's just put that on the table. But to make it a blatant black and white issue and not see who is stimulating these students, which is a small group, getting a large group of attention, while in the background we have this dark group where it's not that dark. It's easily to trace that the money is coming from terrorist states that are supported, Russia, Syria, that most of us would agree are bad actors, that have influenced their way into the United States. And because we in the free countries practice freedom of speech, it gets a little bit carried away because we also practice the free throwing of money. And our leaders ought to be able to stand up and say that, not Biden fist bumping the gentleman whose name I forgot in Saudi Arabia. Hey, isn't that cool? Hey, you know what? We're over it. No, the guy that died, the reporter, isn't over it. The people that got gassed aren't over it. Children aren't over it. Frankly, and maybe as unpolitically correct as it sounds, the oppression of women, I'm not over it. And you'd think they'd be protesting against what's going on. A rapper in Iran, another bad actor I haven't brought up yet, who finances a lot of this thanks to U.S. money, yank the money, you pull the plug on a lot of this. And so, John, you might think we disagree on this. I don't think that we do. I think where we disagree a little bit is where the narrative is forming. It's Gaza, Hamas versus Israel. No, it's a deeper issue that's brewing for a very long time. It's really terrorism versus common civility. And that's what the students were protesting against that. Go ahead. I've taken up a lot of time. I'm especially fired up about this issue today.
No, I can understand, but there's a lot to respond to there and a lot to put into context and question. Because I would say that, you know, a load of people, including very educated people, will say that Israel is an apartheid ethno-state at the moment, that it does not give freedom to a lot of the people of Palestine, and is continued to occupy land and continue to take land. And it is clear that there is what is political Zionism in control of the country in a way that means that a lot of Jews who live in Israel also do not feel that it represents them. So we're in a situation where when that exists and that is true, you are definitely going to see a response in violent terms. You're definitely going to see an October the 7th happen. Now, that doesn't make the October the 7th right, but the Israelis knew very well that something was being trained, something was being planned, something was being happened, and at the moment that it was about to happen, they completely had their defenses down. So everything looks contrived to a lot of people. So I agree with you, but then also that contrived nature when we're talking about things like Soros co-opting these leftist groups. Well, Soros organizations are also heavily behind the neocon push that has led to the destabilization of Eastern Europe, and were a lot of the push of the NGOs that have seen, like I reported about the Ukraine. At the start of the color revolutions, it would take 100 to 150 NGOs to cause an overthrow of a Soviet regime. By the time it got to 2004 in Ukraine, it was 30,000 NGOs, a load of them backed by people like Soros. So they're playing both sides there. So those are two of the things
Boom,
that I
you're
would
absolutely
put forward.
correct. And that's a very well more put than my point. And sorry again to cut you off. That's exactly what I'm saying. It is a huge issue, and we've turned it into one player versus the other, right? And we have short memories about what has recently happened in the Middle East and what happens on an everyday basis. It's not as black and white as Israel being right and Gaza being wrong, or vice versa. What I think is more black and white, where I appreciate what you're saying, is changing the narrative that bad actors are just trying to mix it up and raise holy hell because they're like the king. If they're behind their closed walls, like Soros will use him, and if the public is fighting with each other, they're not focusing on what they're doing. That's why these bad actors, to your point, play both sides of the coin. And my real point here is quit financing both sides of the coin and be more transparent about the fact that anarchy is just a really bad idea, and that leaders need to step up and state that. You have a right to protest, both sides do. But in a way, didn't California at UCLA kind of do, to your point, didn't they know kind of well that this group of people, call them counter protesters, were going to show up at UCLA and raise holy hell? It's America, for God's sakes. If I pick my nose on a street corner, I'm picked up by a camera. All right? I can't literally, they go, oh, Netter must have a nose hair. Look, and it's on TNT radio. Well, not on you, but on Twitter. So both sides are guilty of just not keeping the peace, because that anarchy helps us keep our eye off the ball. which are general issues which affect our everyday life. And I know we're coming to the end, and that's a lot of what Rebuild California is all about. Why this was going on at the campuses, California was passing some very draconian laws about voter rights, et cetera, et cetera. And Johnny, I appreciate it. I know I love this point counterpoint. This is really more of what the world needs. That's Rebuild California is about opening voices, and that's what I practice at and under my Gunwood in my newsletter. Thank you for having me on today.
Hey! Stick around. You are here hopefully till the end of the hour if you're still around. So we're gonna
I
go.
thought it was 40 minutes instead of 20.
Oh,
I'm excited.
awesome. Yes, most definitely. So we'll go to a quick break beforehand, and then we'll have a last quarter of an hour to speak. So you're listening to today's News Talk on TNT.
This is Johnny Vedmore on today's News Talk TNT.